My name is Miles Radner. I'm 36 years old, and I lived in my parents' house long after most people my age had already left their childhood behind. Not because I lacked ambition or couldn't afford rent somewhere else, but because loyalty has a way of anchoring you deeper than convenience ever could. My mother needed help after her heart surgery. She needed someone steady, someone quiet, someone who didn't ask for applause. That was me. Clarice, my wife, moved in with us right after the wedding. Rent-free. Obligation-free. At first, it felt like family. Like a unit forged by love and a shared sense of duty. But the more time passed, the more I realized that Clarice wasn't there for family. She was there for strategy. I watched the house change in subtle ways. My father had always been the spine of the place, his heavy steps, his quiet wisdom, his insistence on washing the cars himself every Saturday morning. After his passing, the silence in the house took on a weight of its own. It wasn't gentle or peaceful, it was thick and intrusive. It clung to the furniture. It echoed in the hallway. And eventually, it started filling the spaces between Clarice and me like fog. We still had dinner together, still watched the same late-night TV reruns. But her laughter was always half a beat too late, and her eyes kept drifting toward her phone. I thought it was grief. I told myself, give her time. But silence has a way of revealing what words try to hide. I started noticing how she would answer questions with questions. How she flinched when I mentioned Dad's will. How she dodged conversations about the company, Radner Biotech, like they were grenades. She hadn't known my father the way I had. She hadn't stayed up with him during those sleepless nights, hearing him mutter about board projections and future patents while his hands trembled from illness. She hadn't cleaned up his medications when the bottles slipped or helped him to the car on rough days. But she started talking about the company as if she were born in its boardroom. Still, I said nothing. Because I was loyal. To her. To my mother. To the idea of marriage as something sacred, not transactional. Then came the morning I walked into the office, my father's office, the one with the mahogany desk and the framed diplomas that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and I heard her voice. Clarice. My wife. Clear as a bell. Standing in front of the reception desk like it was a stage she'd rehearsed on for months. I'm Clarice Radner. As of today, I'll be assuming the CEO position. I stopped mid-step, caught between denial and disbelief. There she stood in a cream blazer and heels so high they looked surgical. Her hair was pinned into a tight coil, and she wore the smile I'd only seen in boardroom photos and real estate pamphlets, the smile that meant a deal had already been signed, even if you didn't know it yet. The receptionist looked up, clearly confused, but Clarice didn't flinch. She was in full performance mode. My husband, Miles, won't be returning. He's grieving. He's not in the will. My chest hollowed. That's when she saw me. Her eyes flicked up from her tablet, paused on my face, and rather than shock or guilt, there it was. A smile. Sharp and amused. Like she'd won a game I hadn't known I was playing. You're in the way, Miles, she said, smooth as butter. You should leave. The receptionist's eyes darted between us. The entire lobby froze like glass. And in that stillness, something inside me cracked. But not the way she expected. I started laughing. Not a loud, unhinged kind of laugh. Not even bitter. Just a quiet, genuine ripple that I couldn't stop. Because in that moment, watching her stand there in borrowed power, dripping with confidence built on assumptions, I realized how wrong she was. About everything. She didn't know. She didn't know that my father, the quiet man who had spent a lifetime watching people and saying little, had seen her from a distance and measured her accurately. She didn't know that before he died, he sat me down with a trembling hand and slid an envelope across the desk. She didn't know about the second will, the updated one, the legal one, the one that not only named me the sole heir of Radner Biotech, but left her out completely. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. You're in the way, she'd said. And I laughed. Because she thought she'd finally pushed me out of the shadow. She had no idea that I was the shadow. When I left the office that day, I didn't say a word to her. I didn't correct her. I didn't show my hand. I walked past her like a man who had already buried his grief and was now burying the illusion she'd built on top of it. That night, I sat in the study my father once called his thinking cave. I poured myself a single glass of scotch. The one he kept for milestones, and I opened the envelope. Inside was not just a copy of the new will, but a handwritten note. Miles, the people who underestimate you will always be louder than those who don't. That's why I'm writing this down. For when the noise begins. The silence in the house that night wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't hollow or cruel. It was filled with purpose. It was the sound of truth waking up. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt my father's presence again, not in memory, but in action. Clarice had made her move. Now it was my turn. That morning felt normal. That's the part that still bothers me. How easily betrayal can dress itself up in the clothes of routine. I brewed coffee just the way Mom liked it. Half decaf, half regular, a splash of oat milk, and 2 cubes of sugar. She always said it tasted like a warm Sunday morning, even if it was a random Tuesday. I made her oatmeal, slid her pill organizer toward her like always, and kissed the back of her hand while she hummed some old jazz tune under her breath. That's the version of motherhood she had returned to after Dad passed, quiet, slower, faded at the edges like a photograph from a different era. She still smiled when she said his name, though. That never changed. I told her I was going to the office, not for work, just to feel close to him. The building still smelled like his cologne, a subtle hint of cedar and citrus baked into the wood panels. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I told Clarice I needed a few weeks to process, to realign. She didn't object. Not out loud. But I saw the slight curve of her lips, the kind that says, "Take all the time you want. I've already moved ahead." Still, I didn't expect what I walked into. I parked in the same spot Dad always used, right up front, beneath the awning with the brass, reserved, executive use only plaque. It felt strange sliding into it, like trying on a coat you swore you weren't ready to wear. The security guard, Donnie, gave me a respectful nod. I think he saw the confusion on my face even before I did. "Everything all right, Mr. Radner?" he asked. I nodded slowly, like I needed to convince myself it was true. "Just visiting," I said. The elevator ride was quiet. Just the hum of the motor and the weight of old memories. I looked at my reflection in the mirrored walls. Still the same face. Still the same soft jawline Clarice once said made me look too trustworthy for high-stakes business. Still the same eyes that looked for the best in people and too often found disappointment instead. When the doors opened to the main lobby of Radner Biotech's executive floor, I didn't expect a crowd. But there they were, dozens of employees from different departments, all standing around with coffee cups in hand and forced politeness painted across their faces. That was the first alarm. The second came just a second later. Clarice's voice. "As of today, I'll be running the company." Effective immediately. My spine locked. I stepped forward through the crowd as people turned. Some recognized me and quickly looked away. Some just looked confused. Then I saw her, standing near the front desk like she had been born there. She wore a navy pantsuit with sharp shoulders, her hair pulled into a severe bun, and those diamond earrings I once saved for 6 months to buy her on our 2nd anniversary. Her posture screamed confidence. The voice of someone not just giving an update, but issuing a declaration. "My husband isn't fit to lead. He's not in the will." It felt like hearing your own obituary read aloud while you're still breathing. And then she saw me. She didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't stutter. Instead, she smiled. Like a wolf. "There he is," she said with faux surprise, her voice rising above the whispers. "You're in the way, Miles. You should leave." I stood there, frozen for a breath, while her words ricocheted through my chest. I wasn't angry. Not yet. The room was too full of absurdity for anger. I was trying to understand how someone could stand in front of a room full of your father's legacy and declare you irrelevant. Some part of me wanted to step forward, to demand answers, to ask her how long she'd been planning this. But I didn't, because all I could hear was laughter. My own. I started laughing. It wasn't intentional. It just rose up like a wave I couldn't hold back. A deep, knowing laugh that didn't fit the room. It startled a few people. Someone dropped a pin. One of the interns actually took a step back. Clarice stiffened. Her expression faltered, just for a moment, but I caught it. That's when I knew. She didn't know. She didn't know what I'd been holding. What Dad had told me. What was coming. I stepped closer and looked her dead in the eye. "You're right," I said, smiling. "I don't belong here." The words confused her. I watched it ripple across her perfectly constructed confidence. But I kept going. "I'm just here to honor my father," I said quietly. "To remember what loyalty looks like. What respect sounds like." I turned, walked back toward the elevator, and let my laughter linger like perfume. In that moment, I wasn't the man she pitied. I was the man she underestimated. And those are two very different things. On the ride down, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes. The digital copy of the real will was there. Time-stamped. Scanned. Backed up twice. I didn't need to use it yet, but knowing it was there gave me a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Outside, I stood beneath the awning again and looked up at the building. Radnor Biotech, my father's company. The structure of his dreams and sacrifices. She thought she could wear his empire like a costume. She didn't realize it was tailored for someone else. Someone who knew how to listen, who knew how to wait. And when the moment came, how to act. I slid into my car, started the engine, and drove home. Not to confront her. Not yet. But to prepare. Because a storm was coming. And I was no longer the man standing in its path. I was the one holding the lightning. Clarice didn't know I'd been preparing for her long before she made her move. That's the thing about silence. It's not always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. She thought she had orchestrated her power grab like a symphony, but she never noticed the quiet percussion I'd been laying underneath, one soft beat at a time. And the truth is, the moment I started laughing in that lobby, it wasn't because I found her audacity amusing. It was because I already knew she was too late. She didn't know about the envelope. The one Dad gave me months before he died. The one sealed in wax and hidden behind a false panel in the bottom drawer of his old desk. He called me into his study one afternoon while Clarice was out shopping, and I still remember the way the late sunlight filtered through the blinds, stripes of gold across his thinning hair and weathered face. He looked tired, but not frail. Determined. Focused. He sat down slowly, motioned for me to do the same, then placed the envelope on the table like it was loaded. "She's planning something," he said, his voice low and sure. "I've been watching." I blinked, unsure. "Clarice. She thinks I don't see it," he continued. "But she's been too eager, too calculating. She doesn't ask how I'm feeling, she asks how long the transition plan will take. She's always circling conversations about power, never support." I stayed quiet, unsure what to say. I didn't want to believe it, not fully. Clarice could be arrogant, sure, but manipulative? Then again, I remembered the look in her eyes when she first asked about the family business. She made it sound like small talk. "So, when your dad's ready to retire, what happens next?" I brushed it off, told her I wasn't even thinking about that. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "Well, someone should be." Back in that study, Dad tapped the envelope twice, then pushed it toward me. "Open this if she ever tries to take what's not hers." I took it, unsure what I was even agreeing to. He didn't explain much after that. Just leaned back in his chair and said, "You're quiet, Miles. That's what makes you dangerous." At the time, I didn't feel dangerous. I felt like a son trying to protect his father, a husband trying to hold together a marriage that didn't quite fit anymore. But in hindsight, I think Dad saw everything I was too emotional to face. He saw the way Clarice changed around other people, how her praise for me vanished the moment someone with power walked into the room. He noticed how she talked over me during dinner, how she corrected my stories as if polishing a public image. He watched her. And he recorded everything. That was the part she never saw coming. While she practiced smiling in the mirror, rehearsing speeches to herself about becoming the visionary successor, Dad had been documenting every move. It started subtle. A voice recorder tucked into the edge of a bookshelf. Then cameras, cleverly disguised in places only he would know. I found the files after his passing, meticulously labeled audio clips, login histories, timestamps of unauthorized access to internal financial documents. And in all of them, Clarice's voice, clear as crystal, revealing herself without realizing she was being watched. She'd mocked me during dinner one night, called me a dreamer with no drive, while sipping her wine. I remembered how Dad went quiet after that, said nothing, just cleared his plate and left the room. I thought he was tired, but he wasn't tired. He was done pretending. She'd underestimated the man who built a company from scratch and survived 4 recessions. She thought she was smarter because she read books about disruptive leadership. But Dad understood people, and he understood legacy. That's why the updated will didn't just name me as CEO. It included a personal note to the board explaining why. A signed video. A notarized letter. Everything airtight. And she didn't know a thing. The funny part? I let her believe she was ahead. I smiled when she started asking questions about the company's board structure. I nodded when she suggested I take a sabbatical to clear my head after Dad died. I even helped her pick out stationery when she printed Radnor letterheads with her own name on them. I remember watching her tuck them into her designer briefcase, like she was stealing blueprints for an empire. She didn't know I was quietly scanning copies of each document, emailing backups to a private server. She thought she was being cunning. but she was just sloppy. One night, she asked if I remembered Dad's computer password. I acted like I didn't. He always kept that stuff in his head, I told her. She laughed, kissed me, said I was probably right. The next morning, I saw a failed login attempt on the admin account. She was testing the waters, pushing boundaries. That was when I started cataloging everything. Every time she accessed a financial file, I made note. Every time she spoke to one of the board members casually, I traced the call. She thought she was building a castle in secret, but I was already sketching the escape tunnel beneath her. And through it all, I said nothing. Because what's the point in warning someone who's already climbing their own gallows? Dad once told me that ambition isn't dangerous until it's paired with delusion. Clarice had both. She saw herself as untouchable, as inevitable, the new face of Radnor. And for a while, I let her enjoy the fantasy. I let her move her queen across the board, unaware that I'd been quietly shifting pawns, lining up bishops, waiting for the moment her crown would tip. And when that moment came, when she stood in the lobby and announced herself like royalty, I didn't need to raise my voice or cause a scene. I just laughed. Because her speech, her smile, her entire coup, it was already obsolete. She thought she was walking into a company that didn't belong to me. But I had the will, the documentation, the recordings, and the full backing of the man she'd underestimated the most. My father. Clarice thought silence made me weak. But she never realized silence was the only weapon I ever needed. She used to think I didn't notice. Clarice believed she could speak her ambitions into existence behind a locked bathroom door, like power was a spell you could conjure by repeating your title into a mirror enough times. I never needed to press my ear to the wood. Her voice carried. Lady CEO Radnor, she would say with theatrical pause, like a performer trying to find the perfect rhythm before stepping on stage. She tried it with different tones, playful, authoritative, seductive, commanding. She was rehearsing every night, and the irony was she thought she was doing it alone. The first time I heard her, I just finished folding Mom's laundry and was passing by our bathroom. The door was ajar. Clarice was standing there in her robe, back straight, shoulders sharp, speaking to her reflection like she was addressing an invisible audience. I watched her silently for a moment. Her hands moved as if she were outlining bullet points, and her head tilted in that specific way she used when trying to seem both warm and important. Let me be clear, she said to her mirror self. Radnor Biotech will continue to thrive under my leadership. Under her leadership. Not ours. Not mine. Just hers. I stepped away before she could see me. Back then, I told myself it was harmless. Aspirational. Maybe she was just trying to feel important after everything with my father's illness. But over time, the tone changed. The words became less hypothetical, more certain. She started referring to me in the past tense. Miles was never interested in growth. He prefers safe ideas. Safe people. It wasn't just a performance anymore. It was a rewrite. I'd watch her at dinner, her fingers wrapped around a wine glass, her eyes scanning headlines on her phone. She followed every business influencer with a podcast, every startup CEO who posted LinkedIn essays about disrupting old systems. I used to think she was just looking for inspiration. I didn't know she was looking for ways to replace me. One night, she told me she was thinking about enrolling in a business leadership course. I smiled, nodded. You'd be good at that, I said. She kissed my cheek and replied, someone has to lead this family into the next decade. I laughed at the time. I didn't know she wasn't joking. The mirror speeches became part of her routine. She started doing her makeup in front of our full-length mirror instead of the vanity. I'd catch her talking while she applied mascara, lines like, we're pivoting to a more global strategy, and our leadership values integrity, agility, and innovation. Yes. One evening I caught her in the act, not just rehearsing, but recording herself. She had her phone propped on a stack of towels, camera pointed directly at her, and she was mid-sentence, pitching herself as a thought leader. Hello, I'm Clarice Radnor, and I'm passionate about reimagining legacy companies for a modern world. I stood in the doorway, arms folded. Practicing for something? She jumped, then laughed too quickly. It's just a trend. These intro videos, everyone's doing them. Branding, you know. She was branding herself, not as my partner, not as someone continuing a legacy, but as the legacy. I played dumb. That became my strategy. Every moment she sharpened her claws, I sheathed mine deeper. When she printed out new business cards, white linen stock with bold, embossed lettering that read Clarice Radnor, Executive Strategy Consultant, I complimented the design. When I found mock-ups for company letterhead with her name in the top corner, I told her the layout was clean and modern. What she didn't know was that I photocopied every one of them, scanned them, emailed them to a personal archive marked Clarice Moves. She even mocked the employees, our employees, behind their backs. Have you met Aisha in finance? She once whispered to me after an office holiday dinner. She still writes checks by hand. Can you imagine? Another time, she rolled her eyes at Lucas for wearing the same navy tie to 2 meetings. If you're going to work in leadership, at least pretend to have range. I watched all of it, stored it, not just in folders on my computer, but in the vault of my memory. Because these weren't just insults. They were indicators. Clarice didn't see the people who made Radnor Biotech work. She didn't understand loyalty, only leverage. She didn't value the slow, methodical growth that my father built his empire on. She just wanted the throne. She told me once that I lacked the killer instinct, that I was too kind, that in today's world, kindness is just a disguise for mediocrity. I asked her if she thought that about my father too. She didn't answer. She underestimated the quiet. She underestimated what it meant to sit in meetings and let other people talk, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was watching, listening, waiting. Dad always said, there's power in patience. The real ones don't shout, they sign. Clarice, though, was all volume. She was trying to become a brand before she built a foundation. And I let her. I watched her print out mock press releases about Radnor Biotech's transition to modern leadership. I watched her scribble notes for future board speeches, each one more self-aggrandizing than the last. I even saw a drafted email she never sent, addressed to a tech firm in Palo Alto, inquiring about a possible future merger led by a dynamic new executive. She was planning moves I hadn't blocked, because she didn't realize I'd already made mine. Every time she practiced in the mirror, every time she whispered about succession plans over glasses of wine, every time she tucked a fake letterhead into her leather briefcase, I smiled on the outside. But inside, I was cementing the foundation of her undoing. She thought the mirror was a safe space. She forgot that reflections reveal everything, even what you try to hide. And I wasn't just watching. I was remembering, recording, and getting ready. I got there early. Not just a few minutes before Clarice's arrival, an hour early. Before the lights in the break room were turned on. Before the front desk staff finished their coffee. Before the security guards switched shifts. I stood outside Radnor Biotech's glass doors, watching the reflections of the city crawl across the building's face, and reminded myself that this was the last day I'd have to pretend. No more smiling through betrayal. No more acting like I hadn't seen what she was becoming. Inside, everything felt sharp with anticipation. The lobby echoed a little more than usual, the fluorescent lights humming louder, the elevator doors snapping shut like exclamation points. Clarice had no idea. That was the best part. She thought she was walking into a coronation, that her stage was set. But the truth was, the curtains had already fallen on her act. She just hadn't noticed yet. I took the elevator to the top floor, the executive floor, and walked into my father's office. It still smelled like him. A mix of old leather and cedar polish, the scent of someone who built something with his hands and then handed it off with pride. The chair creaked under my weight the way it always did. I rested my palms on the desk, the one Clarice had started referring to as the future conference table, and looked out the wide glass windows. This was his legacy, and she thought she could claim it like a handbag on sale. At 9:15, I walked out into the hallway just in time to see her striding in. Clarice always walked like she was being filmed, heels clicking with purpose, chin high, posture straight as if she'd been trained in some private school finishing class. She wore a crimson blazer today, bold and deliberate, paired with a silk blouse the color of champagne. Her hair was in a braided bun, her makeup surgically precise. To the untrained eye, she looked like power incarnate. But I knew better. She didn't see me at first. She was too busy giving orders. Lucas, I need you to have the nameplate on the executive parking spot changed today. It should say Clarice Radnor, CEO. She said it with ease, like it was already law. Lucas Omari, our operations lead, looked over her shoulder and met my eyes. He gave the slightest nod. Clarice turned. For half a second, her mask slipped. Her eyes widened just a hair, and her mouth twitched in that imperceptible way people do when they realize they've lost control of a moment. But she recovered quickly. "Why are you here, Miles?" she asked, her tone flat, polished. "You don't work here anymore." I smiled. It wasn't fake. It wasn't forced. It was the kind of smile you give someone who just revealed their hand at a poker table only to realize the game had already ended. I didn't know you were promoted, I said casually. I must have missed the board vote. Clarice's eyes narrowed. We both know your father didn't leave you in charge. True, I said. But he left something better. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope. Not the digital copy. Not a screenshot. The actual envelope. The one sealed by my father, signed across the back with that unmistakable stroke he used since I was a child signing birthday cards. Clarice froze. What is that? She asked, her voice suddenly smaller. I stepped forward and laid it gently on the receptionist's desk. Everyone in the lobby stopped pretending to work. Aisha from finance, Lucas, even the mail clerk paused at the sight of it. I slowly unsealed it in front of everyone. Inside was the notarized copy of my father's final will, a second copy of the board authorization letter, a printed statement from our legal counsel affirming the document's authenticity, and the kicker, a handwritten note on Radnor Biotech letterhead, dated 3 weeks before his death. The company goes to my son, Miles Radnor. Trust no one else. I handed the documents to Lucas. Board meeting's been called for noon. I believe everyone will want to see these. Clarice's voice rose sharply. This is absurd. You can't just waltz in here and flash some dusty paperwork like it's a will. I asked, turning to her. Signed, witnessed, notarized, and filed? That's exactly what it is. She stepped back slightly, her heel catching the edge of the reception rug. He told me, he said I'd be involved. You were involved, I said. You were the reason he made changes. Clarice's face flushed. Her hands fidgeted at her sides. This is an ambush. No, I said quietly. This is a reveal. Lucas cleared his throat. Clarice, I'll need you to step into the boardroom now. We have to go through these documents formally. She looked around, hoping someone would stand beside her. They didn't. Aisha turned back to her monitor. The receptionist suddenly found something very important to type. Even the interns looked down at their shoes. She was alone in a room full of people. And I was standing exactly where I needed to be. Clarice gave me one last look, her eyes searching mine for something weakness, maybe. A crack. A hint that I could be swayed or softened. But she didn't find it. Because that man was gone. The man who used to flinch when she raised her voice. Who apologized when she mocked him in front of friends. Who sat quietly while she rewrote his story. Now I was holding the ending she hadn't written. I watched as she walked stiffly toward the boardroom, shoulders still straight, but eyes wide with the first flicker of panic. And in that moment, I felt nothing cruel. Just clarity. This wasn't vengeance. This was restoration. She thought the company was something she could walk into and claim. But you can't steal legacy. You either build it, or you don't. Clarice walked into the boardroom like it was her throne room. Head high, lips painted like war, heels echoing on the hardwood floor. She wore defiance like perfume, saturating the air with her presence. But there was a tremor beneath it now, a fracture in the way her eyes darted, in the delay between her breaths. She was trying to hold the illusion together with sheer posture. Too late. By the time the board assembled, the atmosphere had changed. What used to be cautious interest from executives now pulsed with something quieter, expectation. Clarice sat at the head of the table without asking. I sat across from her, calm, deliberate. Lucas Omari entered last, holding the envelope I'd given him earlier. He closed the door behind him, locked it. Standard procedure for a sealed executive session. But it sounded, to me, like the closing of a vault. Or a trap. Clarice crossed one leg over the other, pretending she hadn't noticed the silence. Let's not waste time, she began, her voice clipped and polished. We're all here because of some confusion Miles has about company leadership. No one responded. Not yet. I didn't speak either. I waited. Lucas set down the documents like sacred relics, one at a time, smooth and deliberate. The final will. The authorization letter. The note in my father's handwriting. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. The facts carried their own thunder. Clarice tried to interrupt. These aren't valid. I was told. You were told wrong, Lucas said, his voice the kind of calm that ends arguments. Across the room, Aisha stood up. She was our financial manager, and she didn't like drama. She preferred facts, spreadsheets, policies. So when she started speaking, the room tilted toward her with respect. I've been reviewing financial records over the last 4 months, Aisha said. Specifically, access logs to our restricted accounts. There were unauthorized attempts to schedule wire transfers from the executive budget into a shell company registered under Clarice Radner's name. Clarice jerked in her seat. That's a lie. Aisha didn't flinch. I have IP records, login attempts, timestamps, all aligning with Clarice's work laptop. Clarice's gaze shot toward me. You're orchestrating this. I tilted my head slightly. No, Clarice. You orchestrated it. We just pressed record. And with that, Lucas reached for the remote and clicked the projector to life. The screen buzzed, and then her voice filled the room. It was a recording. Crisp. Undeniable. Once the old man is gone, Clarice's voice said through the speakers, I'll turn this place into a modern empire. Miles can do HR or something if he needs to feel important. She laughed. The room stayed silent. Another clip rolled. I'm not waiting for anyone's blessing. These people need leadership, not sentimentality. I'll make sure they know who's in charge the moment the will is read. Then one more, from a night I remembered clearly, the board dinner 2 weeks before Dad's stroke. Clarice had gone into the kitchen for a private call. Dad's study mic had picked it up. They'll all fall in line, she said to someone on the other end. Especially Miles. He's soft. That's why I married him. He's easier to control than he thinks. The air was gone from the room. Clarice stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. Her eyes blinked twice, slowly, as if refusing to register what was happening. This is manipulated audio. AI. Something. It's real, Lucas said, cutting her off. I verified it myself. The files came directly from your father-in-law's internal server, encrypted and backed up to legal archives. Clarice turned to me then, really turned, her mask gone. Her face was pale beneath the foundation, her lips parted in a question she couldn't even form. How long? She whispered. Since before you rehearsed your first speech in the mirror, I replied. She stood up suddenly, pushing the chair back so hard it scraped across the floor. You're all insane. You're taking the word of a dead man and an insecure son over. No, I said, rising slowly. They're taking the word of a founder. A man who built this company with his own hands and trusted only those who honored it. They're trusting the truth. Clarice looked around, eyes wide now, searching, pleading, but no one moved. The heads of marketing, compliance, legal, they all watched her the way you watch a collapsing tower from a safe distance. We'll have legal follow up with you, Aisha said firmly. For now, your access to company accounts, documents, and internal communication is suspended, effective immediately. Clarice let out a small, bitter laugh. You think this is over? You think I won't take this to the media? You can try, Lucas replied. But the media won't run it without proof. And we have all of it. She pointed at me, a finger trembling. You did this. You played the victim while you waited to stab me in the back. I didn't move. No, Clarice. You stabbed yourself. I just held the mirror. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just stood there, surrounded by the company she never earned, the people she never respected, the husband she thought she could outmaneuver. Her face changed slowly, from rage to disbelief to something closer to grief. Grief for a throne that was never hers. She picked up her purse, white leather, far too bright for the mood, and walked toward the door without another word. As she passed me, she paused for just a second. Then she whispered, You embarrassed me. I met her gaze and said quietly, No, Clarice. You did that all by yourself. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her with a quiet finality. Lucas looked around the boardroom. I think we can consider that matter settled. No one disagreed. The room began to clear. The energy shifted back to business, recovery, stability. But I stayed for a moment, standing beside my father's chair, letting the quiet soak into my skin. This wasn't triumph. It was confirmation. The truth, long buried beneath Clarice's performance, had finally been excavated. And what remained was mine to rebuild. The house was quiet when I got home. Not peaceful, not soft. Just quiet in that strained, loaded way that warned you before a storm rolled through. The lights in the foyer were off, but I could see the glow from upstairs, flickering like someone was moving between rooms. I didn't rush. I took off my jacket, hung it neatly on the rack, and placed my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the one Clarice had insisted we buy from that overpriced interior boutique downtown. Everything had its place. That was always her rule. Even when nothing else did. I could hear the faint rustle of bags being zipped and drawers sliding open. When I walked up the stairs, the master bedroom door was open just a sliver, enough to see her silhouette hunched over the bed, stuffing clothes into one of the monogrammed suitcases she had claimed were an investment in our future travels. The same luggage we never used. Funny how plans turn into evidence. She didn't look up when I stepped into the doorway. She just kept folding with sharp, mechanical precision. "You embarrassed me," she said, without turning. Her voice was brittle. No venom. Just a flat, exhausted admission. Like it was the only line she had left. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You did that yourself, Clarice." That made her pause. Her hand gripped the edge of a silk blouse, ivory, sleeveless, expensive, and she held it there for a beat too long before jamming it into the bag. I watched her shoulders rise and fall with every breath. "You could have just talked to me," she said after a moment. "Handled it privately. You didn't have to humiliate me like that." I didn't laugh. I didn't scoff. I just shook my head slowly. "No, Clarice. You could have talked to me. Months ago. Years ago, even. You had every chance. But instead, you built a story where I was the obstacle. You treated me like a placeholder until you could rewrite the ending." She finally turned, and her face, stripped of the makeup and boardroom glamour, looked smaller than I remembered. Not younger, just less certain. "I thought I was helping," she said, her voice almost pleading now. "You're not a fighter, Miles. You're loyal, quiet. You're not made for war." I let that sit in the air for a second. I wasn't made for war? "You're right," I said. "I'm not. But I am made for legacy. For stewardship. For protecting what matters. That's why I won. Not because I wanted to, but because someone had to protect my father's name from someone who only saw it as a shortcut." Her jaw clenched, and for a second I saw the old Clarice. The one who cut through negotiations like a blade. The one who told me she liked the way I listened instead of talking just to be heard. The irony, of course, is that she mistook that listening for passivity. She moved past me and walked into the closet. I followed, slower. She was reaching for her jewelry case when I spoke again. "Don't bother trying to log into anything," I said quietly. "I changed the locks on Dad's study. Disabled your admin access. And the joint account? I moved the funds to a private trust 2 weeks ago." Clarice froze. Her fingers hovered over the jewelry case like she'd just touched something hot. "You've been planning this?" I met her eyes in the mirror. "No, I've been preparing. There's a difference." She opened her mouth, maybe to lash out, maybe to apologize. I'll never know. But then she just shut it again. Her fingers curled into the edge of the vanity, and I saw the moment it hit her. She had no leverage left. Nothing. No access to the company. No claim to the house, my family's house. No financial hold on me. Only a bag of designer clothes and a head full of speeches that no one was listening to anymore. When she walked past me again, she didn't say another word. She descended the stairs like a ghost, the wheels of her suitcase bumping softly with each step. I followed her to the door. Not to stop her, just to witness the end properly. At the threshold, she paused. "You loved me once," she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. "I did," I said. "I loved the version of you that wanted partnership, that believed in the life we were building. But somewhere along the line, you stopped seeing me as a partner. You started seeing me as something in your way." She turned to F.A. And for a second, I softened. I saw the girl I met at that campus mixer so many years ago, the one who argued with professors and wrote essays with fire in her voice. I saw the woman who once kissed my forehead when I was sick, who stood beside me at Dad's funeral in a black dress she never wanted to wear. But that woman was gone, eclipsed by ambition, hardened by her own belief that power could substitute for purpose. "I never made you feel small," I said gently. "You just never learned how to feel whole without tearing something else down." Clarice stood there for a second longer, then wheeled her suitcase out into the cold evening air. She didn't look back. I closed the door behind her slowly, and then I stood there, in the foyer of my childhood home, in the silence. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean, like fresh snow on a lawn that had been trampled for too long. I went to the study and unlocked the desk, sat in the leather chair my father used every evening. I opened the drawer and looked at the envelope again, not out of need, but out of reverence. Then I turned off the light, and for the first time in years, the house felt like mine, not shared, not borrowed, mine. The first call came at 8:03 a.m. I didn't answer. It was too soon. The scent of fresh coffee still clung to the air in the kitchen, and the sunlight was just beginning to warm the tiles beneath my feet. My mother had gone back to bed after her morning tea, Her recovery still required rest, even though she insisted she was fine. I sat at the table alone, watching the screen of my phone flash with Clarice's name. Again. Again. She hadn't texted the night before. Hadn't knocked. Hadn't demanded. I thought maybe she'd take the loss quietly, gather the remnants of her pride, and vanish with her curated grace. I should have known better. By 8:12, she'd left her first voicemail. Miles, please. I just want to talk. You can't throw away everything like this. Not over a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. That word lodged itself in my ribs like a dull blade. The recordings weren't ambiguous. Her voice echoing through the boardroom hadn't stuttered. Once the old man is gone, Miles can do HR or something. He's easier to control than he thinks. There was no misunderstanding. She understood exactly what she was doing. She just never believed I'd have the courage or the evidence to fight back. By 9:30, she was texting Lucas. When he didn't respond, she switched to Aisha. When Aisha ignored her, Clarice turned to desperation, cloaked in casual concern. Screenshots flooded my phone. Aisha sent me one. Hey, just wondering if Miles is okay. This isn't like him. And another. It's important he knows I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I love the company too. Love. The same word she once used so freely, like it was a tool, a performance, a key to every locked door. I knew what was happening. Her carefully curated world was unraveling, and she was scrambling to stitch it back together with borrowed apologies. But none of them landed, because the truth was out, and people had stopped pretending. Her friends began to pull away. Not publicly, just in little ways. Unfollowed her on social media. Stopped liking her posts. Removed her from group chats that once buzzed with brunch invites and travel plans. The same people who cheered her ambition from the sidelines now ghosted her with silent judgment. Because nobody wanted to be associated with the woman who tried to stage a hostile takeover of a grieving husband's legacy. Then came the email. Subject line, let's talk. I almost deleted it without opening. But something in me was curious. Not hopeful, curious. The message was short. Miles, please let me explain. I made a mistake. I thought I deserved it. I thought I could help. You never cared about the business the way I did. But maybe I misunderstood that too. Please. Let's talk. Not as enemies. Just as the people we were before all this. Clarice. I stared at the words. You never cared about the business. It was always that with her projection. Just because I didn't crave the spotlight didn't mean I didn't bleed for that company. I just chose to do it quietly, the way my father had. I remembered late nights drafting reports while she scrolled through glossy magazines. I remembered staying behind to handle inventory while she jetted off to networking events that doubled as personal vacations. I remembered being told that I was too soft, too kind, too hesitant. But what she never understood was that my quiet wasn't absence, it was commitment. And now, she was grasping at the thread she'd pulled loose herself. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer. By noon, he had drawn up the papers. I signed them that evening. Filing for divorce wasn't something I celebrated. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closing a door that should have never opened in the first place. Unnecessary mercy. The envelope, the one my father gave me, now sat framed on my desk, beneath glass, surrounded by carefully placed photos of him and me at the company's 10-year anniversary gala. In one of them, I was smiling awkwardly in a suit too tight. He was beaming, not because of profits, but because we were there, side by side. Clarice's image wasn't in that frame. She hadn't gone. Said the event was too low-key to be worth her time. Said we should be focusing on bigger optics. Her words. I used to think that kind of strategic mind was admirable. Now I knew better. The next voicemail came at 5:42 p.m. Miles. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I thought I was doing what needed to be done. I thought maybe I could show you what the company could be. But you blindsided me. You weaponized your father's death. That last part almost made me laugh. She hadn't cried when he passed. Barely flinched. Just poured herself a glass of wine and said, at least he didn't suffer long. The same night she brought up succession planning. And now she wanted to accuse me of manipulation? I stood at the window, watching dusk settle over the neighborhood, the sky dipped in shades of blue and ash. Somewhere down the street, a kid was riding his bike in circles. Birds rustled in the trees. The world continued spinning, unbothered by unraveling marriages and shattered ambitions. The next morning, my lawyer sent confirmation. Papers served. Clarice didn't respond. Not immediately. But later that night, I received one last message. Not a call, not a voicemail, a simple text. You were never as weak as I thought. I stared at it, and then I deleted it. No response, because I didn't need to explain myself to her anymore. I didn't owe her my time, my silence, or my patience. The man she thought she could manipulate had left the stage, and in his place stood someone she never saw coming. Someone who built his strength in the quiet. Someone who had nothing left to prove. Clarice didn't vanish. She couldn't. People like her didn't fade into the background. They clawed for it, bit it between their teeth, and screamed when it slipped away. The day after the divorce filing made its way to her, she did exactly what I expected. She went public. Or tried to. It started with a curated statement she emailed to 3 online business magazines, the kind that fawned over polished women with bold wardrobes and bolder claims. I read the article with a still cup of coffee in my hand. Her words were calculated, soaked in victimhood, and peppered with vague accusations. My husband weaponized grief. I was pushed out despite my dedication. I loved his father as if he were my own. It was laughable, really, how she painted herself as both the misunderstood strategist and the grieving daughter-in-law. She even tossed in a line about being silenced by male ego, which would have landed better if there hadn't been hours of recording showing her using my father's death as a career springboard. But the real blow came an hour later. Our lawyer released the video. It was something my father recorded 3 weeks before he died, with Lucas sitting beside him in the study. I hadn't even watched the full thing until that morning. I thought it would be too painful. But once it was clear Clarice intended to rewrite the narrative, I realized it was time. The clip was short, just under 6 minutes. But it changed everything. Dad sat in his old leather chair, wrapped in a cardigan, thinner than I remembered. But his voice was clear, calm, direct. If you're watching this, it means there's been some confusion about my wishes, he began. Let me be perfectly clear. My son, Miles, is the sole inheritor of Radnor Biotech. I trust him with this company because I've seen how he leads. Not by force, not with ego, but with integrity. He paused, breathing slow, then added, anyone else who claims authority over this company is doing so without my blessing. And if they call it loyalty, they're lying. That clip swept through our company's internal networks like a tide. Employees who had quietly distanced themselves from Clarice now messaged me directly. Some sent apologies. Some sent their respect. And some, like Aisha, simply sent a period, one that said, it's over. Clarice, on the other hand, spiraled. I didn't see her, but I heard about her from mutual acquaintances and a few once loyal followers. Her inner circle fractured fast. People who used to toast to her ambitions at rooftop bars now ghosted her entirely. She tried to hold networking events, small brunches, charity panels, but attendance dwindled. Her brand, once defined by bold lipstick and bolder proclamations, was now clouded by whispers. She lied about the will. She forged wire transfers. She got played by her own husband. I never corrected them. I never stepped in to rub salt into the wound. That wasn't me. I just watched from a distance as she burned the bridges she once danced across. It didn't happen all at once. It was slower than you'd think. Pride doesn't go out in a blaze. It crumbles piece by piece. What she didn't know was that I still had access to the old email account she used when helping with Radnor's outreach. I didn't snoop. I just checked once to see if she was still trying to maneuver something behind the scenes. What I found was a message she never sent. A draft. To a PR firm. Subject line. How to recover a brand after a personal scandal. Her words were laced with desperation disguised as polish. I am seeking guidance on controlling a narrative that has recently shifted against me. I was positioned as the future of Radnor Biotech, but internal family dynamics have distorted the public perception. I need a way to redirect the conversation. Ideally with empathy, strength, and a touch of reinvention. She never sent it, because even she knew there was no redirection coming. Not when the man she married had become the evidence she couldn't discredit. Not when the founder himself had spoken beyond the grave. The worst part for her, I imagine, wasn't the loss of the company. It wasn't even the divorce. It was the silence that followed. She was used to being seen, praised, envied. But now, no one was looking. No one was quoting her anymore. No one reposted her CEO manifesto on LinkedIn. Her social media presence dried up like paint in the sun. And in the private quiet of her rented condo, I know because the house was never hers to keep, she raged. I imagined her pacing in designer heels across hardwood floors she didn't choose, drinking the same wine she once sipped while mocking my father's team. Alone. Once, I passed her on the street. Unplanned. Unavoidable. She was standing outside a cafe downtown, sunglasses too large for her face, speaking into her phone with clipped frustration. She didn't see me at first. I could have kept walking. But I didn't. She turned, caught my eye. For a brief second, I thought she might sneer. Might launch into some sharp comment meant to draw blood. But she didn't. She just stared at me like I was someone she didn't recognize anymore. Like I was a stranger who vaguely reminded her of a memory she once tried to rewrite. She opened her mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to strike. But I nodded, once, and kept walking. Because there was nothing left to say. She had her fall. I had my peace. And peace, I've learned, doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs to stay. Every Saturday, I take my mother out for dessert. It started as a quiet routine, something small to break the weight of the week, but it's become a ritual now. Her choice changes every time. Some weeks it's lemon cake, bright and tart. Other times, it's a slice of red velvet with too much frosting. She always claims she'll just have a few bites and ends up scraping the plate clean. That day, we tried a new cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop on Wilton Street. The walls were painted robin's egg blue, and the tables were mismatched but charming. It smelled like cinnamon and something warm rising from a nearby oven. I helped her into the seat by the window. She was wearing one of Dad's old cardigans. It hung off her small shoulders now, but she liked the way it still smelled of him, even after 2 years. She glanced around the cafe, smiled at the pastel decor, then looked at me with the kind of eyes that didn't need to ask questions anymore. "Your father would have been proud," she said matter-of-factly. I didn't answer right away. I stirred my coffee slowly and looked out the window. A father and son passed by, the boy tugging on his dad's arm, pointing excitedly at a toy store down the block. That simple pull, eager, familiar, trusting, hit me in a place I hadn't known was still tender. I took a breath and nodded. "I think about him every day." "Good," she said. "He'd want that." We didn't talk about Clarice much anymore. Not out of pain, just irrelevance. She had become a chapter closed so completely, it didn't need revisiting. The divorce had finalized 2 months ago. Clean. Efficient. No drawn-out court battle. No theatrics. She'd signed the papers with a comment that still echoed in my mind. "Guess I underestimated you." It wasn't bitterness. It was bewilderment. Like a scientist who'd miscalculated her own experiment and watched it blow up in her face. Clarice was gone. The company was stable. The board had approved the new wellness initiative I proposed, a way to expand our reach into lower-income communities, providing genetic screenings at subsidized costs. Something my father would have been proud of. He never talked about expansion in terms of conquest. He talked about it in terms of impact. I walk through the halls of Radnor Biotech now, and people greet me, not out of obligation, but respect. Not because I inherited something, but because I earned the right to carry it forward. That's the part no one tells you about legacy. It's not about preserving the past. It's about proving you understand it well enough to build something better from its foundation. Clarice never understood that. For her, legacy was about control. Optics. Ownership. But legacy isn't something you take. It's something you receive when others trust you not to ruin it. I still keep the envelope on my desk, the one my father handed me the day he said, "She's planning something." It's framed now, beneath museum-grade glass. His signature is slightly smudged from the oils on my thumb the night I opened it, but it feels more human that way, more real. It doesn't feel like a weapon anymore. It feels like a vow. There's something liberating about no longer needing to prove anything. I don't walk into meetings trying to outshine anyone. I don't force my voice to be the loudest in the room. Instead, I listen. I ask questions. I remember the names of people 2 tiers below the executive level. I shake hands with the janitor every Thursday when he's cleaning the 4th-floor lounge. My father always said, "The person cleaning your floor sees more of who you are than the person sitting across from you at a board table." He was right. Legacy, I've learned, is carried most not in headlines or handshakes, but in habits. In the quiet way you show up every day. In the consistency of your integrity. In the apology you don't have to give because you never needed to break someone to climb. People still ask about Clarice from time to time. Some do it awkwardly, trying to gossip. Others do it kindly, unsure if it's a sensitive topic. I always give the same answer. I wish her peace. Because I do. I don't hate her. I don't even resent her. What happened wasn't a crime of cruelty, it was a collapse of character. She believed that ambition justified erasure, that wanting something badly enough meant you were entitled to it, no matter who got hurt. But I've learned that real power, sustainable power, doesn't come from taking. It comes from building. And I've spent every day since she left rebuilding what she tried to burn. Quietly, steadily, without fanfare. No LinkedIn posts announcing my resilience. No passive-aggressive quotes disguised as enlightenment. Just work. Just showing up. Mom took a bite of her cake, closed her eyes like it was a memory she was tasting. "This is lovely," she said softly. I smiled. "Next week, we'll try the place near Park Hill. The one with the glass tarts." She nodded, licking frosting from the side of her fork. "Your father would have liked that one." I looked down at my coffee. "I think you would have liked this version of me, too." She reached across the table, placed her hand over mine. He always did. Outside, the world moved on. People passed. Cars buzzed. New couples made plans. Children laughed somewhere far off. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the ground beneath me wasn't shifting anymore. It was solid. Clarice is gone. The storm she brought, the confusion, the betrayal, the smoke and mirrors, has cleared. And now, I'm not picking up pieces. I'm planting them. Growing something new. Something steady. Not for applause. Not for revenge. But for the man who trusted me. And for the man I've become. A legacy served without apology.